Welcome, friends, to the Share, Invite, and Proclaim channel. My name is Judy. I've been in Hebrews for a long time, and let me give a quick review before I begin with our person for today. Chapter 1 and 2 is about Jesus Christ being superior to angels. Chapter 3, Jesus Christ is superior to Moses. Chapter 4, Jesus Christ is the provider of God's rest. And chapters 5 and 7, Jesus Christ is our high priest, and that is superior to the Levitical line of priests. Jesus Christ provides a superior hope in face of believers' conflicts and apostasy, and that's chapter 6 and some verses in chapter 10. Jesus Christ provides a superior covenant with God. That's in chapter 7 and chapter 8 and 9 and 10, various verses in those chapters. And then, there's a superior life of faith by Old Testament witnesses in chapter 11. And those are the ones that we've been going through: Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Joshua, that we're going to talk about today, and Rahab. And then Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. Now, the writer of Hebrews doesn't go into the prophets like Ezra, Nehemiah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, but basically the rest of the Old Testament. And we won't be covering those simply because there's just too many. And the bottom line is that they lived in faith. And then we'll finish up with chapter 12 and 13, the superior life of believers in Christ. So today I want to talk about Joshua having a superior life of faith in God. And Joshua spent most of his life in transition. And we want to think about what made him so successful as a leader and as a military man. You know, transition can be any length of time. Be like 40 years in the desert with Moses, or maybe 20 years in invading and taking over the promised land. But what character trait did Joshua have, and what was needed to fulfill God's mission to possess the promised land? Basically, to be strong and courageous. God told him 4 times in the first chapter, be strong and be courageous. Well, also in chapter 1, we see out this display of his character trait in this time of transition. In verse 3, every place that Joshua went, God gave him success. Verse 5, no man would stand before Joshua, meaning that God's mission would be successful and that God would use Joshua to accomplish that mission. No one could stop him. God said that he would not fail him nor forsake him. Verse 6, Joshua is to divide the land among the tribes. Verse 7, success is dependent upon Joshua following the law of Moses. Verse 8, Joshua must meditate on God's law day and night for success. It had to be a priority. And verse 9, Joshua is commanded to be strong and be courageous. And then verse 18, rebellion leads to death. Now, this was a daunting task without the strength and the courage that God would give him. In a time of transition, Israel had several symbols to remind them of all that God had done for them, and some symbols that all the tribes would be working together as an army to possess the land. You know, they had to take the land by force. First of all, each tribal leader took a rock from the bottom of the Jordan River as a remembrance, as a testimony to teach their children what God had done for them. Secondly, Joshua had the men that were in the desert circumcised before they entered the promised land. And then third, Rahab, a harlot, sheltered the spies that Joshua sent in to spy out Jericho. And she had heard about the Red Sea experience. She had heard about the Israelites killing the two kings of the Amorites. And she said that their hearts were melted and their courage was gone. She believed and she had faith in God and said that God was in heaven and on earth. So the spies, in a reward for her faith and hiding them, when the king of Jericho went to her home and said, where are those spies that entered your home? And Rahab sent them in a different direction. Well, to reward her, they gave her a cord of scarlet thread, red thread, to hang in her window. And she and anyone else that were inside her home would be spared when Israel attacked the city. And this scarlet cord was a symbol that she had joined the covenant of the blood redemption of Jesus. So Rahab and her family became a part of the Hebrews. Another symbol was the Ark of the Covenant. This was a mobile, portable throne where God, the invisible God, called Yahweh in the Old Testament, was enthroned. And this ark was carried by the priests, holding it on poles. And when the ark was carried across the Jordan River, when the priests put their foot in the river stopped flowing, it dried up, and the ark then the priest would take the ark to the center of the riverbed, and the Israelites would cross the Jordan River on dry ground. What that's all about. I just had something pop up. And then when the priests left the shore of the Jordan River, it continued to flow. And another symbol, removing their sandals because the place is holy ground. You remember when Moses encountered God in the burning bush, God told him to remove his sandals because he was on dry ground. Well, Joshua had this kind of an experience before they were to invade the city of Jericho. The host of the Lord, which is Jesus Christ, came to Joshua and told him to take off his sandals, that he was standing on holy ground. And so Joshua bowed down to Jesus and worshiped him. And then Jesus gave Joshua the battle plan. And the point of all that is that Jesus fights our battles in unusual ways. And when we obey and follow his directions, we have success. After the battle for certain cities had ended, Joshua had the cities burned and the people and the animals destroyed, and only the silver, gold, and bronze and iron were put into the treasury. Well, we always wonder, why was Joshua instructed to kill every person and their animals? Well, biblical scholars tell us that the people in these cities were so far gone in their sin. Their hearts were hardened, and they would not accept God as the Almighty because of all their false gods. Additionally, if the Israelites lived among them, they would turn and practice some of these ungodly practices. Now, the faith of Joshua, well, when he and Caleb were instructed by Moses to go into the promised land and spy out the land, when they returned, they gave a report about the obstacles and the opposition that the Canaanites possessed. But Joshua did not back down and say that the task was too hard, because he knew of God's promises and his covenant to Moses, and he believed that God would honor his word. Obstacles and opposition were not too difficult for God. And you know, our obstacles and our opposition is not too hard for God. Joshua had survived the wilderness experience. Here we go with this again. What's all this coming into my... Anyway, Joshua had survived this wilderness experience with Moses, and he trusted the leadership of Moses. And so he never doubted God's promises. Secondly, Joshua faced these obstacles and opposition when he led the Israelites to take the city of Jericho. The defense of the city was disheartening. God told Joshua how to take the city, and it would take faith to believe the method that would be successful, and that they would not look like silly fools. The plan was each day for a week, march around the city walls, making noise, praising God, blowing their trumpets. And then on the seventh day, they would go around the city 7 times, and do the same thing with loud noise, with praising God and blowing their trumpets. And then the walls fell down, and the Israelites captured the city without loss of their life. God's plan took faith. Man's way would not have been successful. It took the intervention of God only when faith was the key for success. I don't know if you know it, but I learned as a child the jingle, down came the walls of Jericho. Jericho, Jericho, down came the walls of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. You can Google that song. Well, let's look at the faith of Joshua. Now, as I looked in my Bible, I must have heard some sermon, because I had written in the margin, the worship of faith. Joshua bowed down to Jesus. The work of faith. These battle plans were unusual, but Joshua obeyed. The weight of faith. They had to endure going around the city for 7 days, and then 7 times on that last day. The word of faith. Joshua told the people to shout for the Lord has given you the city. And then the wonder of faith. The miracle was accomplished, and they burned the city to the ground. One more thing. God set a ban that any of the spoils of war were prohibited, except for those metals, lest you covet them and take some. The result would be a curse and bring trouble upon Israel. So in a time of transition, you can still have sin enter one's life, and this disobedience can be deadly. So the point is, continue to give God what he requires, which is obedience. Because in chapter 7, we find out an example of that example. Joshua and his men were going to attack Ai. But the problem was that Achan took a mantle from Shinar, which is another name for Babylon, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold, and Achan hid them in his tent. A consequence was that Israel lost this battle with Ai, even though they had 3,000 men, more than enough. But because Achan took those items under the ban, Israel lost. Joshua and the rest of the tribes found out that Achan was the culprit who had taken items under the ban, and so they stoned Achan and his family and his animals, and then burned a remnant of these things in the valley of Achor in chapter 7. And this example demonstrated the seriousness of sin. But God gives second chances for you to do what is right. Because of this sin, and it was taken care of by God's wrath, God told Joshua to attack Ai a second time. And he said to Joshua, I have given it into your hand. So God gives second chances. Here was the battle plan. 5,000 men would go into the rear of the city. And when the attack started, Joshua and his men would pretend that they were being beaten, and they would begin to flee in stages, so that the men of the city would rush out after them. And then God told Joshua to raise a javelin toward the city as a signal. And then when all of the men then were out of the city, they attacked from the rear, and they burned it and killed all of the inhabitants. And so then the army of Ai was trapped between the front and the rear guard, and the Israelites destroyed all of Ai. Another interesting thing that we need to know is that it's critical to ask God before decisions are made. Joshua was deceived by the Gibeonites, who were actually neighbors of Ai, but they pretended to be from a far distance. They put on old clothes, they made their food crusty, and they claimed that they came from a faraway country. But they had heard about Joshua and Israel and their fact that they had taken Ai, but also that they had taken Jericho. They wanted a covenant of peace with Israel. And so that way, if they were attacked, then Israel would be bound by their promise to defend them. 5 kings joined a confederacy to strike against Gibeon. And then, of course, they asked Joshua to defend them. 3 events happened. 1, God killed many by confounding their leaders. I can hear them just now arguing, well, when should we attack? How should we attack? Who's in charge? All of that. Secondly, while in their battle, God threw huge stones down on these 5 kings and the people and killed more with stones than in the battle. Now picture this, more stones falling from heaven, killing these people. That's a miracle. And third, Joshua prayed that God would allow time to fight against these 5 kings by causing the sun to stand still and the moon stopped. Another impossible kind of miracle for God to accomplish this mission. 4 kings agreed to attack Israel, but Joshua killed them all because God assured him that they were defeated by his hand. Then Joshua gave the Israelites a great challenge before he died. He said, "Choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Before he died, the land was divided among the tribes. And Joshua was about 90 when this invasion of Canaan started, and he was 110 at his death. So when God's mission for him was finished, it took 20 years to push out the Canaanites because they had to invade city by city. Joshua's superior life of faith is demonstrated through God's mission for his people, for his believers, like us today. It will be accomplished through you if you believe and don't doubt, and if you act, or through someone else who is obedient to God, God's mission will be accomplished, either through you or someone else. Secondly, God changed Joshua's character from a follower of Moses to a warrior. The battle is the Lord's, he said. God needs to change us to fight our present battles. Third, God provides us for success. Joshua needed strength and courage. What do we need? God gives second chances. Ask for forgiveness and obey God's instructions. Joshua had a life of superior faith, and I hope that we can learn from his superior life of faith. Next, we will look at Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, those together. And I don't know if David will be included in that or a separate one. We'll see. But I hope that you're having a good day, a good week, a good life. I pray that you'll find a Bible-believing church where you hear about God, where you hear about the Lord, who Jesus was, who he is, and who he will be at the second coming. I hope that you find a Bible-believing small group where you can study God's word and be in fellowship with other believers, growing in your love for the Lord. Thanks for watching.